My name is Gwendydd Hardcastle. I know my name looks a bit complicated, but you can call me Gwen. And I'm the academic manager of the Teaching Centre here at the British Council in Hyderabad. Okay. I'll just tell you a little bit about myself. The reason that I am here is that I have been through this course for developing assessment literacy in the British Council. So I have personal experience of going through it myself. So I'll be able to give you that aspect as we go through today. And what better person to talk about something who's someone who's got first-hand experience. We'll go through assessment to begin with, okay? And assessment literacy itself define that. Then we'll look at what is available at the moment, the in-service literacy training that I've been through, the approach that we took, why we took it, and then further implications of that, okay? There'll be plenty of time at the end. I anticipate my talk to take about 40 minutes as we go through it, and then there'll be about 15 minutes at the end for you to ask as many questions as you like, okay? And don't be shy, because it's entirely possible that I will miss out some important information that you would really like to know. So, the assessment of student learning is obviously a participatory process, and it provides data and information that you need on your students' learning, right? This is obviously, having been here for a day already, should be something that's quite clear to you. And it's important for you as a teacher and as a centre to be able to monitor your students' progress. It's important for it to be used by the teachers and the students together, as well as the centre, so that you can analyse the strengths and weaknesses of your programme, which could be your English language programme at that time, and see if you can improve teaching from it, the directions that you take, maybe change what you select to teach based on it, or realise with positive backwash that you need to concentrate more on certain areas. That's entirely possible, okay? And also to help understand your students' learning process and what you need to do to focus on that. Of course, the main target of assessment is to show that the students are learning. It gives them a nice big tick. If they got 35 out of 40, they're extremely happy, or they might prefer 38 out of 40. That is often the case. But it gives them something a bit more solid as a learner, to see that they are going forwards and to give them another goal, okay? Then they can keep changing their goals and keep getting higher, and it provides a great motivational tool for your students. And also, it gives validation for you as a teacher that you are getting your message across in your classroom, right? Because there are times when you do wonder whether the students have quite picked up what you've tried to teach them. So then you can double check whether the students have actually picked it up, or whether you need to go back to the drawing board with your approach and try a different tack. As I've just touched on, actually, it does also give you your institutional improvements if you're looking at it together, not just yourself as a teacher, but all teachers getting together and looking at your assessment, looking at how it performed with your students, looking at whether it did what you thought it did, which is extremely important in the validation process, which I'll talk about in a little minute. Then it will help you take your institution, your teaching centre, your school forwards, and hopefully take your students forwards at the same time. I think something that's really important about assessment is that it's ever-changing, something which I've really learned. And we as teachers and those involved in assessment on every level need to keep that in mind. because otherwise you'll fall behind and you might not be pushing the boundaries that you should be with assessment. Okay. And of course, as I mentioned, it looks as whether changes have made improvements, whether what changes you made based on your data analysis has actually helped the students' learning. It does happen that it might not. It could go the other way. Then what do? You go back to the drawing board, of course, yeah? And I think certainly in institutions, and certainly myself, before I started this course, I believed that assessment was just something that you had to give your students at certain times in a course and just double check, because it was more about the students really needing a test, wanting an end-of-level test, wanting to know that they had made some progress, possibly not necessarily believing their teacher if they simply said that they had made progress. And assessment is a lot more than that. But for many teachers, including myself at the beginning, it was part of my admin duties on my class and something that I gave out without great thought. And sometimes that's when we miss the point, yeah? When it becomes part of your admin process, then obviously you're missing something with your students and how to help your students and, of course, the rest of your colleagues and your institution. So, assessment literacy, all right? I wasn't literate in assessment before I did the course, obviously, okay? So those who are assessment literate understand what methods to use, yeah? As I previously talked about the fact that you handed out your paper, your test, that you photocopy to all 20 students and give them all the same thing because you have to. There's more than one method, there's more than one way to test one thing, be it grammar, speaking, listening, writing, vocabulary. There's more to life. There's certainly something I've discovered. There's more to life than multiple choice questions, okay? Which most people think is the best way or the most common way or the easiest way to test whether your student has actually learnt grammar. And there are so many issues around multiple choice questions, issues such as the fact that students can simply tick an answer and get it right. It doesn't mean that your student actually understood the question or knew the grammar at all, okay? And that's something that you need to try and protect when you're designing a test, is really making sure that the question that you design from the bottom all the way up is testing what you think it's testing and really testing your students' knowledge. If you can get 50% on a test by just ticking all the way through, then you've got a problem, yeah? And that's why assessment is changing, I think. It's not just the only reason, that's for sure. There are loads of reasons. But that's one example of how simply giving out a test without really designing it and thinking about it and looking at different methods that you can use to test that skill can give you far less information than you anticipated from your student, and it doesn't give you valuable information that you can help with their learning process. Also, if you're assessment literate, you can communicate the results effectively. All right, so this means that when you design your test, you also think all the way through the process into what the grades are going to be, what is the pass benchmark, how are you going to assess it, what tools are you going to use to decide whether it's right or wrong. A, B, C, D might not be the best way for you to test whether this candidate is any good at speaking, all right? So you need to define those parameters, and how does that result reflect a student's ability? That's a really big question. You know, if you give someone 60% and say that's a B, what does that mean? Possibly not a lot if you think about it, yeah? I got a B. What does that mean? Not a great deal, unless you've thought it through and you know why, of course, the student has got that, and you can explain to them what it means, yeah? So that's your report card grades and your test scores. Scoring is much more a part of validity in testing than it used to be. And so it means that you have to think of everything from beginning to end when you're looking at your assessments, yeah? Including the raters, including how it's going to be marked, including how it's going to be delivered, how many people you need, yeah? How it's going to be administered. If it's in class, are you going to need somebody to help you with it? Yeah? Is it something that you want to mark outside of class, or you want to be assessing live inside the class? Okay. These are questions that you need to ask yourself when you're looking at something in-house. Right, student motivation. Assessment should be a tool to motivate your student, hopefully not something which makes them feel bad about themselves, yeah? Which also means that, for me, the test needs to be clear and enjoyable, or at least as comfortable as possible for your student. You know, if you've got a big light shining in their face during a speaking test, you could make them pretty scared if it's one-on-one. You need to make sure that the students are prepared for it, which obviously makes you again think about what you've covered in the course and how you're going to assess that. Because if the students are not prepared for what's coming, then they won't be that comfortable in the test itself, okay? And it maximizes student motivation, obviously, because they want to do well. I mean, that's the nature of a student, right? So that helps them a lot if they know how the test is going to be, what it's focused on, and what kind of score. You always need to let your students know what the scoring system is, so that they know what they're heading for. Yeah. Also, validity starts looking at how the participants feel, yeah, which wasn't included previously so much, or wasn't considered previously. And so if you look at how someone feels when they've done a test, then that helps you know how your test was. That can also inform you. If they found it really stressful and confusing and difficult to follow, this means that you need to change something with your test design. Yeah? So the students are a lot more a part, or at least the candidates and test takers, more a part of assessment than they used to be. Their opinion counts, and if you're looking at counselling sessions within your institute, that's a good time for you to ask them about the test and how it went. So looking at assessment literacy in the current sort of teacher training programs, the typical way for teachers who teach English as a foreign language around the world is to start with the CELTA course, which is the Certificate of English Language Teaching to Adults. And this brushes probably only on assessment in any feedback stage, recycling methods, and that kind of thing with the CELTA trainees. But it doesn't look specifically, there aren't any sessions looking at how to assess your students, how to do testing, how to put a test together. Okay. And in the Delta, which is the Diploma of English Language Teaching to Adults, there's one component which does look at testing, which is the case study. This is when you analyze a student and you design a course for them, and you then design a way of testing whether they've learned it. And in that component, you do read up on Hughes, and that kind of thing. But the point here is that it's quite archaic. Hughes's book that everybody uses in the Delta is from the 1980s, and things have definitely moved on in testing since the 1980s and now. Yeah. So really there isn't a great deal out there for teachers at the moment to be training with testing, and then you start teaching and you're expected to do it with your students. And that's why there's often a gap in the kind of tests that are delivered within institutions. So a lot of the in-service training which happens is usually in response to a specific need. Okay. We often need a placement test to evaluate our students so that they can come and study with us at the institution. Or there will be an achievement test, like the test that I was speaking about earlier, your end-of-course test, pass or fail, did you get it, that kind of thing. And occasionally people will have assessment teams within their own institutions. But testing is, at the moment, more reactive in that sense than it is proactive with teachers, especially. So, at the British Council, we were looking at a way to remedy this situation. Previously, until the 1990s, the BC was a world leader in assessment. Yeah, we had the ELTS, which was out, and that suddenly sort of took a back seat. Yeah, we had changes in policy, which meant that assessment became far less important for us. All right? Or at least we weren't world leaders in that. We looked at being world leaders at teaching instead, and assessment sort of took a back step. But now we have a new policy to focus on assessment again. Yeah? So we are looking at building our expertise. We are looking at doing it from the bottom up, starting with the teachers and then hopefully building a group of assessors within the BC who will be working on BC tests and also having a cadre of assessment ready for that, which I'll look at later in the implications section. We started this in 2009, okay, which is when I started. So the things that we wanted to look at in the agenda was getting a CPD program to focus on the theory and practice of assessment. And this was an online course using Moodle, which was delivered in conjunction with Roehampton University in the UK. And about 12 to 15 participants were on every course. And this course lasted about 8 months. Okay, I'll show you a little bit more about it in a minute. Yeah. After you've completed the course, then you look at more specific training in the practical aspects of test item writing and task development. That's the next stage. Then you reach my stage. This is where I am on the scale at the moment, doing an MA program in language testing at Lancaster University. So the BC offers support to teachers who do that, financially and also with your sanity as well in that one. And there is going to be a longer-term commitment to these programs and qualifications. Okay, they are in development at the moment. Hopefully we're building a bank of teachers. Yeah? What we're doing is building a bank of people. We're on cohort 5 at the moment of the CPD program with Roehampton University. So with 15 to 20 people every time, you can see that we're almost reaching 100 people now who have specific training in theory and practice and test development. And then that's going to keep growing. I'm not sure if Roehampton is going to stop. It seems to snowball every time with more and more people. So slowly but surely, we are building nice bank of teachers with relevant knowledge with assessment. So the programme, the Roehampton course, consisted of 2 parts. The first part was the focus on validation, theory and test development. And the second part was the practical application, where you had to design your own test. This is what the Moodle, it's a bit small, but this is what the Moodle page looks like. So people from all over the world are taking this at the same time. That's one slight problem that we found with it, was getting a time once a week where everybody could participate in the online chats with our tutor. That was possibly the most difficult when you've got one person in New Zealand, one in Saudi, one in Paris, one in India, etc., etc. That makes it quite difficult to manage. But otherwise, it's a really clear program, and you can access everything all the time. You've got the background information always available to you. And then you've got the course materials and support are available to you online. Yeah? Typically, we started with background information, which we had to read up on. And then we had tasks at the end of each background reading section, which we had to complete and then discuss with our colleagues. Of course, our discussions were monitored by Barry O'Sullivan, who is one of sort of the leads in language testing at the moment, to give his input and help guide us in any questions that we had. There are 2 assignments. The first one is theoretical, where you're critiquing an existing test. You're looking at about 2,500, 3,000 word assignments here. Some people go crazy and do a lot more. Yeah. And this is when you're really looking at validity. So you can take an existing test. My example is I took the FCE writing test and I critiqued it. I looked for ways in which possibly it wasn't as valid as we thought. It's an easier one to critique because there's a lot of information. You know, Cambridge is so large in testing that you can look up all their sort of background theory quite easily for why they choose specific items, why they do it a certain way, what their rationale is. So once you know what the rationale is, it's quite easy for you to compare when you sit the test to see whether it is actually doing what you think it is doing, which is when you're looking at validity. And secondly, the practical assignment, which is developing and trialing and analysing your own test. So once you've got the theory and practice, you then are set loose to develop your own, come up with your own ideas. It's extremely free. You can design it for your own context. I remember doing a listening, which I sorely regretted halfway through with all the recording problems that I had. But you can look at a specific group of students, your own class that you know, what you really want to find out about them, and you design a test that way. Obviously, you have to justify it the whole way through, but this, for me, was probably the best learning experience on the course, because I really got to try some of my theories. I think as teachers, we spend a lot of time going, oh, that test is a bit naff, or I'm not really sure that test is as good as people say it is. And I used to be in that camp, and then I tried to write a test and realized that there's a lot more to it. And you really have to think of everything from all angles. And it was really a really interesting process to see whether what I thought was being assessed was actually being assessed. Yeah. And that's when you start to really understand the importance of test design. You get a lovely completion certificate at the end, which you can frame and put on your bedroom wall. And you also get 20 European transferable credits. So these credits you can use to go and study an MA if you want at university. Okay. So then after that, if you think you haven't had enough of testing, you then can go on to the program looking more at item writing, okay, and putting your training in practice. This involves a residential program held in Reading in the UK, which was a week-long course, and quite a strenuous week that is, of thinking and designing, where you become a little bit of a testing robot and you start writing your items and testing them out and really understanding a better method and process to develop tests. Okay. And the work that then we develop on that course goes into a large item writing bank that we have under development at the BC at the moment, which is going to go eventually into a British Council test, which we're actually piloting in India at the moment. Okay. And it gives all participants the option of joining the assessment team. So it kind of broadens your horizons, makes you look at teaching a different way, certainly makes you look at assessment a different way. And then, of course, there are other opportunities because of that with promotion, or you might love testing so much that you decide to jack in teaching and go another way. And it opens up a lot of doors for you, I think. And one of the most important things for me is that it involves everyone. The course isn't just for teachers. It's also for exam administrators and people who work in the exams department with existing exams like BEC, IELTS, FCE. And working with those people when you're a teacher and you only see testing from one side, and then you work with someone who sees testing from the other side, which is how many people are going to be there, what sort of tools and equipment do you need. When you look at it from both sides, you develop a much better test that will help everyone. Okay. In the future, we're going to be looking at live and/or online training for all staff who are involved in the assessment area. Okay. We're going to be looking at training for all teaching staff and all administrative and support staff. That's the people that I just mentioned who deal with assessment and IELTS, etc. Okay. So there should be more opportunities, more demand for assessment literate staff, okay, which helps the institution in general. I think something for me is that in the centre that I work at, it's helping us with our continuous assessment, all right? And which is something which is really important. It's not just about doing it for yourself and your own career development. It's about taking what you learnt, putting it in practice, and helping others and cascading your knowledge that way. Okay. And as I mentioned before, it means that we're going to have a larger cadre of assessment in the BC. There'll be hopefully that means that we're going to be heading more towards the way of designing our own tests, which will be available worldwide, and going back to our previous stature in assessment in the 90s. So that's the general outline of what I need to say. So I'd like to open up for some questions if people need a bit more clarification, or if I jumped too quickly over something, which is a terrible habit of mine.
Regarding the assessment, that in communication, so how can we communicate to the students? From our practical experience, when we send the cards, it was done through our students.
Sorry, one more time. How do we communicate what to our students?
Communicating about the assessment. Whatever we assess, these are to be communicated to the parents, to the students. So mostly we want to send it to their guardians, parents. Then those good students, through the students, we communicate it. But sometimes, some of the students who are not good, they refuse to show it to their guardians.
Right.
Then
okay.
how can we do it?
Well, do you arrange meetings with the parents, or if they aren't taking it home, do you have some sort of system where you have the parents signing that they have read your report card?
Yeah, parent signing is very, very important. Those good students, they will show it to their parents, and they will bring with the signature of the parents. But other students, then sometimes they sign for their guardians.
Oh.
Then
okay.
how to control it?
Cheating.
Then is there any device that is going on in other areas?
Okay. Yeah. With something like that, I would say it's very important to actually meet the parent when you've received that document back. Yeah, and say to them, so you've seen this. If you do have counselling sessions with your parents, if you've got a parent-teacher meeting, that's a really good time to double-check if the parent actually signed this document or not. Yeah. And I think as well, teachers need a little bit of training to empower the students to sort of take hold of the grade that they got and understand the grade that they got. It's our responsibility to communicate that to the student. You can't write C and like a comment, this wasn't so great that term, and not discuss it with the student. So if you discuss it with the student and explain to them why and remove that fear from them, although I know that telling mummy and daddy that you got a bad mark isn't the easiest thing in the world, but you need to communicate the grade and what it means to the student and get them to understand it and discuss with you maybe why they made those mistakes, and then maybe even sit down with them and tell them, how are you going to tell your parents this? What are you going to need to get better? Yeah? If they're not getting the grade they want, how are they going to get the grade that they want?
Yeah, it is right for us to detect how the student behave. If we can detect it, it is far better. Otherwise, the schools or the teachers, they think then it is signed by the guardian.
You need to meet that guardian after and double check. You know, you need to have that security measure.
The school or the authority, they have no other means except to send it through the students. And their messengers are the best, the students are the best messengers.
But do you not meet with the parents afterwards? You know, only, later in the term, do you not meet?
Parents, we can meet only when we detect the works done by the students. Otherwise, we think that is signature is all right, and it is it's signed by the guardians. In that way, the teachers or the schools are going in a normal way.
I think you have to make sure, especially if you've got these concerns, you have to make sure that you meet with that parent after, at some point later in the term or in your parent-teacher meetings, and sit down and discuss with them whether they really did sign it or not if you have suspicions. But there should be a mechanism where the student realises that it's coming back to you. Yeah. So cheating is not an option because it's going to be followed up. If they don't have a feeling that it's not going to be followed up, then they're free to forge signatures at will.
Yes, sometimes we practice it at the time of admission. The signature of the guardians are taken care of by the authority.
Right.
So at that time, when we have any suspicion, we compare the signatures. Then we call the student, then we call the guardians.
Okay. Yeah,
then beyond this, if there is other means, then it may be very helpful to us.
Yeah, yeah, that's a good way. Adam.
Ma'am, you just told us about that if we are part of these, either the CELTA or the Delta course, we can improve ourselves as teachers who can assess well. What I would like you to tell us, if it's possible of course, can you give us a few suggestions regarding the same, on how we can improve our teaching? Not all maybe can be a part of CELTA or Delta due to various reasons. So as teachers who will probably go and teach in the high school level, could you kindly give us a few tips?
Wow, that's a big question with a short amount of time. I would say whichever books that you're using, a good place for you to start is to have a look at the teacher's book or go to the British Library here in Hyderabad and take a look at some of the teacher's books that we have there, which give you ideas for activities that you can use in class. And then you can start experimenting with them and see whether they work for yourself. You always need to analyse how you are doing when you are teaching so that you can improve. So if you can find a bank or go onto the British Council website, there are lots of activities that you can use, which you can try in class, and then you can see how that helps you and which direction you want to take, and try other activities, yeah?
Thank you.
Thank you, everyone. Ma'am, there is a saying that teacher teaches for strong students because they are being more benefited, and does assess for weaker student because they are being more humiliated. So what will be our special strategy for assessment of weaker student?
Then I think you need to look at the reasons for that student being weaker. Sometimes there are students who are weaker in tests because they have a lot of nerves, for example, which is something which is really difficult to cater for, but it can be done. If you sit with that student and find out why, if it's nerves, if it's the environment, if it's their comfort level, what can you do which makes that easier for them? Do they find it too strict, and if somebody's walking around them all the time monitoring, does that just make them crack up, they can't go forwards? You also need to look at maybe the way that your test is designed or what strength that student has. Maybe the student isn't that great at reading and writing, so are you going to look more at giving them a test which focuses on speaking, for example? Will they perform better? Are they more relaxed when they're speaking? So can you change the assessment or the way that you assess them that incorporates something that they're more comfortable with and that is their strength? Then that helps sort of eliminate not necessarily eliminate their weaknesses, but it could eliminate some of those factors which cause problems for them in tests.
So what will be our psychological background or psychological preparation?
Psychological, that is the effective part, is something which people don't often consider in testing. So you really do have to look at your students' needs and your students' abilities when you design the test. Yeah? There's no point giving them a really long reading test if you know that you're dealing with 8-year-old children who have a 10-minute attention span. Yeah, so you've got to look at your test load as well. Can you design a task which is making them produce what you want to assess, but not necessarily, it doesn't have to be 2 hours long. Yeah? So look at the length of your test and look at really designing a task which gets them to produce in a comfortable environment what you want to assess. Does that help you? I hope so. Madam?
Thank you. I'm Jayashree from Coimbatore. Assessing everything about the student and teacher is a very good process in education. It's good. But I don't know how many of here know about the ghastly incident that happened in Chennai. A student of 10th standard went into the staff room and stabbed the teacher for assessing him bad. And we need to educate the parents also in due course how we are assessing. It's not for the bad or good of the student. It is only for him to improve.
Definitely.
That the parents are not able to understand, and they at home, if you get 0 or 1 or 2, they start scolding, or they don't give them pocket money or something. They start to
Definitely. It's something that I find is quite, well, it's all over the world, but it's something certainly in India that parents might be more concerned about the scores than the performance itself. And it's definitely our duty to communicate to parents that even if they got a bad score, it might not necessarily reflect their performance in class, and that there are other things to life than getting a 0, 1, 2 or a 5, yeah? The same situation with that gentleman there. It's important to communicate with the parents that they are reading it, that they know what's going on. The more parents feel involved and the more parents understand what is happening in your classroom and what the assessment method is and what it means, then the better it is for all concerned, really. I mean, your method of scoring really should be published or really should be accessible to all the people who are involved in taking that test. And that includes parents.
Thank you, ma'am, for your kind presentation. Here is my question. I am from Chhattisgarh, Raipur. My question is that language teachers, in terms of assessment, we feel quite confident when it is on productive skill, like writing and speaking. But at receptive skills, we are helpless. Why?
Which skills are you helpless at?
Yeah, receptive.
Receptive. Right. Because it is a little bit more difficult to see whether you are testing what you're testing. I mean, that's the thing. The difference there is productive, as you say. It's pretty immediate. If you're testing speaking, you can see quite quickly whether they are good at it or not. But if it's listening, for example, you can't necessarily tell. You have to look at other ways. You can't simply assess listening. So, well, you do, obviously, and you can. But what I'm saying is look at it across the board. That's always a good way of checking whether they are competent at all skills. So, for example, when you are testing their productive skills, maybe take a look at the questions that you pose, whether they understood the questions. Yeah, that's being receptive. So if you've got an interview with them, if they understood your question, then that's also part of listening, actually, rather than speaking. So you can start looking at that to see whether their listening as a receptive skill is at the same level as their speaking. Some people can speak really fluently and quickly, but they may have some issues understanding, which means that their listening is a little bit lower than their speaking ability. So you can assess it whilst you're doing productive skills as well. Yeah, there are other ways of just playing a recording, and recordings are difficult because you have to find a clear one, and it's not authentic. It's not always authentic, and there are quite a lot of barriers, I would say, with that. It's quite difficult to check, but you can definitely do it. If you catch me later, I can show you a couple of examples of some listening tasks which might help you with that. Yeah? Sir?
Madam, I am Deen Bandhu from Patna,
Okay.
Bihar. Should there be any distinct mode of assessment for native and non-native learners?
One more time.
Is there any distinct mode of assessment for native learners and non-native learners
Of English?
of English? We are talking particularly about English language.
Well, I mean, that's not 100% sure what you're getting at. That's quite a difficult question. Certainly the way that, if you look at the difference of measuring a native speaker in the UK, the focus is very different. Yeah, so that's certainly a different mode. We don't have necessarily grammar tests, which we probably should, to be honest with you, in the UK, but we don't have grammar tests in UK schools. So there's definitely a difference, but it's because, the tests are designed for a completely different thing. So if we're talking today a lot about analysing a second language speaker, an L2, and looking really at proficiency and progress, whereas those kind of assessments for native speakers are completely different because you assume that they are already proficient, even if they might not be that accurate.
Thank you, ma'am. Thank you. Thank you, ma'am. I'm Chanbasappa from Karnataka. Just I want to add something to the question raised by Jayashree ma'am, Chennai. The incident she quoted that a student of 10th standard had entered to the teacher's staff room and is stabbed. Here, just I would like to share my opinion. The assessment should not have the negative impact on the child's mind. We should also take into consideration the psyche, the student's psyche, because if at all you have gone insulting the child for poor performance, maybe it's because of so many constraints or so many reasons, but we should not go on insulting the student in public, like maybe it's a classroom or maybe the other occasion. But if we do that, then it will be negative. It will have the negative impact. Am I correct, ma'am?
Yes, that's right. I mean, definitely loads of things have a negative impact. I certainly hope that assessment wasn't involved in that incident. Okay, one last question. Just because he's closer to you.
Good afternoon, everybody. My name is Hamid. I'm head of English department, Kabul University from Afghanistan. So my question is that you talked about multiple choice questions. So most of the international tests are going to be offered through multiple choice questions, and it is also part of summative assessment. So most of the students are not put on the right level, in the right place. So what would be your suggestion to observe and also evaluate real talent of students rather than multiple choice questions? Of course, in most of the ELP programs or English language programs, the diagnostic test is going to be offered to retest the students' talent. But again, most of them are on the basis of multiple choice questions. Mm-hmm. So it is a kind of problem. What would be your suggestion? And also, the second question.
Do you want me to answer the first question first before I forget it, or is the second question linked?
Okay, it's also very, short and related to the assessment. How can we assess a student's learning style before teaching them, teaching them?
Well, right, they're sort of related, actually. I think MCQ or multiple choice questions are a real go-to for people because they do have their advantages. They're quite easy for raters. It's quite easy to have that benchmark and decide how somebody is going to pass or fail, for example. But one thing that I find really difficult when I'm writing multiple choice questions is that it's actually very difficult to know whether you're assessing the right thing. For example, anytime you want to assess modals or the future, I find it nigh on impossible to come up with a multiple choice question, which is really testing a modal. You know, it's like I blank go to the cinema tomorrow. A may, B might, C should, D couldn't. I mean, it's very difficult to come up with 4 choices where one is definitely the right answer and one might be and the other 2 aren't, you know, and that's sort of the model that you're using with MCQs. So I think certainly for certain aspects of grammar, multiple choice is definitely not always giving you what you want. So as I was mentioning to that gentleman earlier, you've got to look at other situations where they're using that grammar, but it's not necessarily a grammar test. We're moving away from that more traditional thing, which is a bit of a problem for test designers at the moment, when your institution wants something which is only multiple choice, and you don't think it should be delivered in that manner to be able to test what you want to test. So something that I would recommend is looking at a portfolio or continuous assessment. I mean, you were talking about measuring your students' talents and abilities. So if they've got a homework, a writing assignment, maybe writing a story, researching their favourite person, that kind of thing, that can be part of the assessment. That goes into your portfolio. That demonstrates the vocabulary, the grammar, that your student is using, their ability to communicate. And you can use that piece of writing, you can use things that you have live in your class, which probably give you a much better picture of the student's ability than a multiple choice end of term test. So continuous assessment is definitely something worth considering using in your classes. And even with speaking, it means you could have them doing a group speaking or a paired speaking, and you're monitoring them with that. And especially if you're looking at children, it takes away that nervousness of the one-to-one interview with this horrible person who's going to mark you down and look scary, So if they're doing it together in the classroom environment, which they are familiar with, then it takes away that issue for them. Does that answer your question? Yeah. And looking at analysing the learning styles, there's loads of stuff out there on learning styles. You can do quite a needs analysis or a focus group with your students beforehand, just to ask them really quickly. You can get a sense of it by saying, what kind of activities do you like in class? Do you prefer to listen to something to remember it? Do you have to write it down? How do they record vocabulary? Do they categorize everything, or are their books really messy? What methods can you use to tailor to that with your students, and getting a full picture of what they do, what they like and don't like, with regards to classroom activities and ways of learning is usually a good starting point for your indication of what their learning styles are. Okay. All right, I'll leave it there because the buffet tables are waiting and I'm sure you're all desperate to get there. I hope at least I've provided some useful information for people this afternoon. It's gone from the board, but my contact details are up here. I don't know if you can get them back up. Do feel free to come and visit me if you're in Hyderabad at the British Library or the Teaching Centre, and I can give you some further pointers if you need it. Okay? Thank you very much.